Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today, I'm going to take a look at Subitus Wyrm, which is one of the many games you can play in the Book of Dragons, which is a card game system that's language independent, colorblind friendly, and you can play more than 18 games by more than 16 designers. Now, Subitus Wyrm is a 3 to 6 player bluffing game designed by Robert Burke, where you're trying to deceive a single player one at a time. So I'm going to do a rules school, which is going to teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. So here we go. Subitus Wyrm is a bluffing game for 3 to 6 players where you're going to single-handedly bluff to one single player. You'll be claiming things like, both of these dragons have glowing eyes, or both of these dragons are 3-headed hydras. The receiver will have to decide whether they trust your claim or not. They'll also have to decide whether to flip over both of the cards or just one of them, which might lead to a secondary claim where the passer can actually change what they've claimed. And the winner of that claim will get to collect the dragons, and you're trying to get sets of 3 of the same dragon to win the game. To set up, you're going to take all 40 cards in the game, you're going to shuffle them together, create a draw deck, and deal 3 cards to each player, face down. They can look at these cards, but they don't want to show them to anybody else. From the 3 cards you get, you're going to keep 2 of them, and you'll discard that 3rd card to a common discard pile. Your first time playing, you won't really know what to keep and what to get rid of, so just keep the ones that you think look the coolest. You'll start the game by having the most untrustworthy player go first, or alternatively, the oldest player can go first. The object of the game is to be the first player to get any 3 of the same dragons, and you'll do this by correctly calling out on people's bluff, and you'll get it by telling the truth and having people think that you're actually lying to them. The game is played over multiple turns. Each turn, the passer is going to take their 2 cards, pass them face down to another player, claim something that is about these cards, and then that player is going to have to either believe them or not, and then be flipping one or both of the cards to see if they're correct. This will continue until one player has 3 of the same dragons. The passer is going to take their 2 cards, think of some claim to make about them, and pass these 2 to any of the other players, which will be the receiver, and make a claim. The only exception to this is if there's another player that has absolutely the least amount of face-up dragons, then they can claim Subitus, and they must be the receiver that you're making the claim to. It cannot be used twice in a row, and they have to have the least amount of dragons at that point. Otherwise, you can claim this to anybody and make anybody the receiver. Now, when you make the claim, you're going to keep these face down. However, I'm going to show you different ways that you can make claims, so I'm actually going to show you these with the cards up. Now, if I wanted to tell the truth, and these were my face down cards, I could claim both of these dragons are looking to the left. Or I could say something like, one of these dragons has 3 heads and one doesn't, if I was wanted to tell the truth. Or I could say, both of these dragons have glowing eyes. Or I could say, one of these dragons faces left and one of these dragons face right. But you cannot make a claim that requires the first card to be revealed in order to verify the second. For example, I couldn't say, both of these cards are exactly the same. Instead, I'd have to say something like, both of these dragons are 3-headed hydras. So as the passer, my cards are face down. Let's say I pass them to the receiver and I say, both of these cards are 3-headed hydras. Now that player that received it has a few choices. So if you're the receiver, you can believe the player and say, I believe you. And then you flip over both cards. If the passer's statement was true, you get to collect both cards and place them in front of you. You're 2/3 of the way to a victory. However, if the passer's statement was false and the receiver believed them, well, the passer would get to keep both of these. Now, as the receiver, let's say the same thing happened. These are both 3-headed hydras, and you didn't believe them. You can call the player out. You can say, I don't believe you, and you would flip over both cards. If the cards looked like this, and indeed it was false, then you would get to collect both of these cards. However, if you called them out and didn't believe them, but what the passer said was actually true like this, then the passer would get these 2 cards. You have a couple more choices. You can believe or call out the claim, and then flip over 1 card, but you must announce beforehand that you're only flipping 1 card. Now, if when you flip the card, it does not prove that you were correct or incorrect, you leave it face up, and it remains there until this next step. In this case, they had said 2 3-headed dragons. I pulled one over. One of them's it, but we're not 100% sure if this is it or not, so we have to go to the next step. The passer can now look at the remaining card and make another claim, and it's only about that card, and it could be the same claim that they just did or something different. and then the receiver must either agree or disagree. Like let's say this passer now says, this card has a glowing eye. And now you're going, oh man, he must have either been lying before or he's lying now, I'm not sure. So let's say the receiver says, I don't believe you. And so we see two three-headed hydras, so they won both claims, so the receiver would win both of these and place it in front of them. But if that passer was telling the truth about that second card, and you did not believe them, then the passer would get to win these cards and place them in front of them, and then they would get to take any card that's already in front of them, including any of the ones that they just owned, and swap it for anybody else's face-up card in front of them. So if it did look like this, that passer could have swapped, let's say, this card for this one, so he's one card away from winning the game. However, if the passer said, both of these cards are three-headed hydras, and the receiver said, I'm only going to flip one of these cards. If it's incorrect, well then the passer will take this card, and then this card here will go to the discard pile. Now let's say the passer says, both of these cards have glowing eyes, and the receiver says, I don't believe you, but I'm only going to flip one card. Let's say they flip this one, and it does not have a glowing eye, so the receiver called them out by only flipping one card. That player will discard the card that's face down, and they will take this card into their tableau. They then could trade any card, including the one they just got, with anybody else. So they could trade this one for this one, and they will have just won the game by having three of the same dragons. Now if this player had just collected the cards but had not won, the player that collected the last cards that round, which is this player, would be the next passer. Otherwise, if someone has three of the same dragons, they win. If all cards have been played and nobody's won, the player with the most cards would win. If they're still tied, then the tied players win. If you'd like to play a longer game, you could play till somebody has 4 of the matching dragons to win. If you're playing with this variant, once the deck runs out, you reshuffle it and discard and play until someone has 4 dragons or until the deck runs out a second time. If there's ever a claim that is disputed, for example, a player said both tongues are glowing. This one clearly is, this one doesn't look like it, but let's say it's disputed. All non-involved parties vote with a thumbs up and thumbs down, and the majority decision's final. If it's tied, rocks, paper, scissors breaks the tie. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Subitus Wyrm and get to the fun quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have more questions, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video. That's the best place to ask them because I'll get notified, but also so will the publisher, and the designer might even chime in as well.